I've come down to Kingston Lacy, which is a National Trust property in Dorset, and the reason that I'm here is because of this splendid obelisk which is in the grounds of the estate. And I've got Jane Masséglia from Oxford University. Jane, what are we looking at?
We're looking at a beautiful pink granite obelisk that was originally brought to Kingston Lacy in the 19th century, in the early 19th century by John William Banks, and has been standing beautifully in the grounds ever since then. The reason that we're excited about it now is because the Rosetta space mission has a lander called Philae in honour of this wonderful obelisk. So we've come down to celebrate the mission and some recent work that we've been doing on the inscriptions.
Now, in historical terms, what is the significance of this stone?
Obelisks were often set up to mark important occasions or good news. In this case, the Philae obelisk was set up by some priests in a temple complex on the island of Philae, who had asked the king at the time, Ptolemy VIII, whether they could have a tax break. These were priests who were running a very popular temple, and lots of pilgrims were staying and lots of civil servants passing through, and the priests had to absorb all the costs of their staying, and they got a bit fed up, so they wrote to Ptolemy and asked if they could have tax exemption. He gave it to them. They were so pleased that they set up this beautiful obelisk as a thanks offering to Ptolemy for giving them exactly what they'd asked for.
And then hundreds of years later, a chap called Banks, who used to own this splendid estate, he was in Egypt, he saw it, and he brought it back to the United Kingdom and erected it in the gardens here, on the lawns behind the house. The significance, though, of the stone, a bit like the Rosetta stone that we know from the British Museum, played a crucial role in helping us to understand the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, yes?
That's exactly right. The Philae obelisk is really one of the unsung heroes of the decipherment of hieroglyphs. Most people know the story of the Rosetta Stone and Champollion, but really it started with some observations that Banks and Young and Champollion, really the early decipherment experts working together, noticed. The Rosetta Stone is the same text written in 3 different languages. The Philae obelisk is a little bit different. We have a Greek inscription and a hieroglyphic inscription on the same monument. They don't say exactly the same thing, but they include the same names. And Banks and Young were able to spot that on the Greek, which they were able to read, they saw the name of the Queen Cleopatra. Now, they knew instinctively there was no way that someone as important as Cleopatra would be mentioned in the Greek bit but wouldn't appear in the hieroglyphs. So it was really Cleopatra that they decided to try and pick out on the Egyptian section, and they found the cartouche that they thought matched her name, and that was one of the first key bits of evidence in how to unravel hieroglyphs.
Okay, so we've got a pattern here of seeing connections that then the scholars were able to go ahead with and fully decipher all of these hieroglyphs.
Exactly right. It was very much one of the early stepping stones in making sense of it. There were lots of people that were working on the decipherment, and they shared information. They were a real scholarly community.
And your connection here now, because we're back examining the obelisk again, almost 200 years after it was brought here. Why the interest today?
Well, other than the space mission which I've mentioned, we were given an opportunity at the Centre of Study of Ancient Documents to come and get some really high quality images of the obelisk. Now we've got technology which our forebears didn't have. We can see things on the stone, we can see the hieroglyphs and the Greek inscription, which is almost completely invisible now to the naked eye. We can take images and we can record it and read it and preserve it for future scholarly study.
So some of that text, I mean, you're only just starting this project, aren't you? What are you starting to see?
Well, I suppose the 2 big finds are that the hieroglyphs that we were expecting to see, we have found, and that's very encouraging. The last time that anybody really took a good record of the hieroglyphs was in 1821, when a lithograph was commissioned to celebrate its arrival in Kingston Lacy, so this goes back quite a long way. What we had then was somebody's drawing of it, and we had no way of knowing whether that person's drawing was really any good. We didn't know whether they knew enough about hieroglyphs to really get them down right. It's been really lovely for us to see side by side our new images with the old hand drawings and realise that whoever drew that lithograph did a really great job. The other thing that's been really great for us is the work on the Greek inscription. Even when it first came to Kingston Lacy, people looked at it and said, we can't make out the whole thing. They could identify the names of Ptolemy and his sister wife and his niece wife, the Cleopatras, but there were big sections on one side of the stone that had already been rubbed away. But with RTI, we can see the remains of that in a way that no one has been able to before.
And I understand it's not just what is said there, it's also the way that it's been engraved that gives you information about the people who did the job.
It's a really particular kind of inscription, particular to Egypt. Ptolemaic Egypt was a strange mixture of Greek influence and Greek culture, but also overlaid over the top of this a really traditional Egyptian religious high class of priests. And these things sort of ran in parallel, and this is exactly what you see on the Philae obelisk, this incredibly formulaic, very formal, old-fashioned hieroglyphic inscription about the greatness of the king. It's a bit like somebody now using Latin. It wasn't really the language or the writing system that people were really using day to day, but it had a certain kind of cachet. It looked scholarly, it looked impressive. But then underneath, we've got the Greek, the layman's inscription that gives much more detail about the petition and the tax breaks that shows in layman's terms what the obelisk was for.